Ruslan here with today's daily update from the Ukrainian front, and before we get into it, if this channel has been useful to you, please take a second to subscribe. YouTube's algorithm has been throttling independent military analysis channels lately, and subscribing genuinely helps this content keep reaching people. Okay, now let's get into the front line, and we're starting with some very interesting information coming out of Druzhkivka. Russian reconnaissance sabotage. Groups reportedly covered 12 kilometers on foot undetected, entered the city and killed 4 Ukrainian FPV operators, reportedly without anyone noticing, as the bodies were only found after the fact. Some footage of this is already circulating online. I'll show part of it, but I won't show all of it, since YouTube doesn't take kindly to that kind of content. The Ukrainian side is warning residents not to open the door to strangers and to stay alert, meaning just a handful of Russian soldiers operating behind Ukrainian lines are already causing real problems, and the tricky part is that catching them won't be easy, so they could still eliminate a few more people. This obviously isn't a catastrophic problem for the rear area, but it's an early warning sign for Ukrainian forces in this large city. A few infiltrators can't decide the fate of such a big city on their own, but they will absolutely sow some panic. It would be interesting to know exactly how many such infantrymen made it into the city. This isn't an assault yet, more of an isolated probing action, a check of the defenses. The main body of Russian troops is still only approaching the city. A full-scale push into the urban area hasn't started yet, but is expected soon. The Ukrainian side has reportedly already lost 4 soldiers fighting for the city, even though things haven't really gotten going yet. According to the Ukrainian side, this was essentially a raid into the rear, and the Russian scouts have already returned from the mission. A couple of these reconnaissance sabotage groups inside the city could cause serious trouble if they're used specifically against drone operators, arguably the backbone the entire front currently rests on. It's believed the Russian infantry entered the city undetected from the north, not through the settlement of Rayske, but from the area of Starorayske. The terrain there isn't solid forest, but somehow the Russian side managed to reach Druzhkivka unnoticed. From the northern part of Druzhkivka, there's footage showing the state of the road from Kramatorsk to Druzhkivka. The highway has essentially turned into a graveyard of vehicles, and it's now under fairly solid drone control. I expect the Russian side will soon consolidate and take full control of the settlements of Rayske and Novoherivka. It's possible the Russian side won't rush straight into the city itself, since starting intense urban combat with weak logistics isn't exactly a great idea. Either way, we'll see how things actually play out. Next, let's move to another settlement that's also very important for the Russian side, Zaporizhzhia. From the outskirts, there are reports that Russian forces have taken Hanivka. The center group of forces has released footage of Russian aviation and artillery striking the town. It's being claimed that this settlement has now come fully under Russian army control, and that information is also being corroborated by independent recent resources. The T-0514 highway has reportedly been brought under Russian control here, with movement continuing north toward Novotroyske. From the Kucherev Yar area, there's also reported Russian advance toward Zoloty Kolodias and Vesel. The Russian side only began actively working this sector about a week ago. Before that, the frontier had been essentially frozen, but with the approaching battles for Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, the Russian side has decided to seriously take on the Donetsk direction AFU positions here. Let's go back to the Zaporizhzhia sector, where there's more news. Northwest of Belitske, Russian forces have reportedly cleared a large slag heap. This heap had been blocking the Russian advance toward the settlement from the south. Now it can be said the city is being encircled from several directions at once, from the small settlement of Zaporizhzhia itself, from the east, and from the north. The Russian side is squeezing the enemy's logistics from every direction, preventing any vehicles from reaching the city. The road near Svitlo Yehorivka has turned into a graveyard of equipment. As a reminder, no objective control footage has come out of Druzhkivka itself yet, although it's confirmed that Russian troops are indeed present there, both in the northern and central parts of the settlement. Now let's move to the Zaporizhzhia direction, where there are reports that the Ukrainian side has managed to retake control of Lyubimevsky and Novosolochny, with Ukrainian forces having released objective control footage. We'll see whether the Russian side will also put out fresh objective control footage from this part of the front, similar to the footage that recently came out of Dnipropetrovsk region, showing Russian forces continuing to hold several settlements there. The war of 2026 shows that either side can take a settlement, since in reality these places are often defended by no more than a couple dozen fighters at most, meaning that with good enough preparation, virtually any settlement can be stormed and cleared, though losses will certainly be taken, since FPV operators will manage to eliminate part of the attacking force on the approach. So essentially, it can be said that Ukrainian forces have managed to push Russian troops back to the eastern bank of the Verkhnya Terza River, while near Dolinka there's a small Russian advance. It looks like something resembling a defensive line is forming along the river's eastern bank. In the north, I'd expect Russian infantry will also try to reach the eastern bank of the river and then plan the next strike from there, potentially either west or north. From Kharkiv, there's a large amount of objective control footage of strikes on the Ukrainian side. Some districts of the city have already been reduced to fully destroyed buildings. This is a city living as a genuine frontline town, with strikes happening inside it on a daily basis. The Ukrainian army will hold onto the city regardless, so I'd expect there to be very little left of it by the end. Now let's move to the Kharkiv direction, where there's also good news for the Russian side. From the eastern side of the pocket, there are reports of the Russian side improving its positions in Druzhkivka. From the western side of the pocket, there's word of an advance in Vasilivka. Full clearing of this pocket is still some way off, since the Ukrainian side has also become more active here, moving in significant fresh forces. So the balance, which had previously shifted heavily in the Russian side's favor, has now returned to something closer to even, meaning Russian dominance in this sector is no longer total. Russian troops on the ground have noted a noticeably increased level of activity from Ukrainian drone operators, and as a result, the pace of the Russian infantry advance has slowed. Either way, within a month, the Russian army needs to resolve this pocket to reduce the risk of Ukrainian forces slipping back through this narrow corridor. So as you can see, on the Donbas front, things are shaping up about as unfavorably as possible for the AFU. Russian forces are storming one city after another, and honestly, there aren't that many cities left here. There's Zaporizhzhia, there's Druzhkivka, which we already covered, Mykolaiivka, there's Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, the two biggest ones, and then Lyman, which is now roughly 80% taken. There's word coming out of Lyman as well. We hadn't had objective control footage from there in a while from the Russian side, and now it's become clear that Russian forces genuinely are present in at least the central part of the city, since Ukrainian bloggers had claimed about a week ago that the AFU had fully regained previously lost positions there, but reality turned out to be somewhat different. That said, there's also bad news from this sector for the Russian side. Ukrainian forces have pushed Russian units back a couple of kilometers in the Kharkivka area, reaching the outskirts of Zelena Dolina, Shenderholov, and so on. Though this happened over some period of time, not within the last day, it's also a fair question how solid Russian control there actually was to begin with, but it's clear the Russian position in this area has genuinely deteriorated. That means reaching Svetohirsk from here will now definitely be harder. On newer sectors, Russian forces are advancing here as well. Between the villages of Brusky and Gorky, Russian troops have crossed this territory south of Kodeykovo. In addition, they're expanding their zone of presence around Volkovka, gradually approaching this border settlement. There's also an update from the northern grouping of forces, which is trying to close this pocket entirely in order to fully cut off the Bahashiv salient, and rifle-level fighting has already started in the tree line south of Yastrebshina. So it's clear they'll be looking to cut off this territory in the near future and turn it into a single, solid, fully controlled salient, pushing the AFU further back from the Kursk border area. That's the picture on the front today. As you can see, most of the action is happening in the Donbas, but other sectors are gradually coming back to life. It's worth taking a separate look at CIA Director John Ratcliffe's visit to Moscow today, which has become a major topic across a number of Western outlets. The trip itself was unannounced. A US military C-17 transport plane landed at Vnukovo airport after routing through Riga, and neither Washington nor the Kremlin has officially confirmed the purpose of the visit. The Kremlin, for its part, claimed it had no information about the American aircraft landing at Vnukovo and said no meetings with US administration officials were scheduled for this week, although sources within the Kremlin press pool say Putin changed his schedule because of the visit and cancelled a major public event. One notable detail: this is the first visit by a sitting CIA director to Moscow since 2021, when then Director William Burns traveled there to warn Putin against invading Ukraine, a warning that, as we know, didn't work. According to the Insider's editor Michael Weiss, the Insider is designated a foreign agent in Russia. Ratcliffe's task may have been an attempt to talk Putin out of carrying out operations against European countries. Weiss links this to intelligence the US has recently been sharing with Poland, the Baltic states, and Scandinavian countries, as well as to a rising number of incidents along NATO's eastern flank, drone incursions, airspace violations, and suspected sabotage activity. The Wall Street Journal, for its part, reports that US intelligence has picked up signs that Russia has begun preparing for a possible new round of mobilization, including exercises in the Kaliningrad region. According to the paper, one likely motive for the trip was to deliver a warning to the Kremlin along the lines of, "We know what you're planning and you'd better not do it," as former US Deputy Director of National Intelligence Beth Sana put it to the outlet. She also didn't rule out that the visit could be connected to the situation around Iran and an attempt to draw Moscow into the negotiating process on that front. Beyond that, Western media are also discussing other possible topics for the talks: a global moratorium on strikes against energy and port infrastructure in Russia and Ukraine, a ceasefire in the Kharkiv and Sumy regions as a step toward broader de-escalation, and the prospects for a wider peace process that could bring the war in Ukraine to an end. Notably, ahead of the visit, the US side asked Ukraine to hold off on strikes against Moscow and Russia's northern regions through today, and according to the Financial Times, a similar request applied to St. Petersburg as well. Interestingly, news of the visit noticeably moved the markets. The Moscow Exchange Index jumped more than 3% after reports of Ratcliffe's arrival, though it later gave back part of those gains. In other words, the market itself seemed to read the visit as more of a positive signal, possibly tied to hopes for progress in the negotiating process rather than as a sign of escalation. So Western outlets largely agree on one thing: the official purpose of the visit hasn't been confirmed, but most theories center on the idea of deterrence, whether aimed at possible operations against NATO or at a new wave of mobilization inside Russia itself. Neither the American nor the Russian side has confirmed or denied any of these theories so far. Alright, we'll keep watching how this develops. Thanks a lot for watching.